Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our monthly data meeting. I am Aaron Bruff, the Director of Data and Statistics at the Utah State Board of Education. Again, thank you for being here. Move forward. Kind of the generic. Please mute your microphones, raise your hands when you have a question, and welcome. Thank you very much. I believe the first one up, well, it's over the agenda, updates to the deadline for school year 2024-25, the October 1 submission, teaching and learning announcements, some data privacy updates on level 2 valid invalid address validations, and then the end of year UTRIX data submission training. So with that, I believe Callista is up first. So again, thank you, everyone. Callista, take it away.
Okay, Aaron, did you want to introduce Amanda now or later?
I am happy to introduce her now. Amanda, if you could turn your camera on so they can see you, if she's here. There she is. This is Amanda. She is started new with data and statistics on Monday. She is the facts coordinator replacing Colby Wilson. Amanda, anything you want to say to the group real quick? Just welcome where you kind of came from, your background.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Amanda Hartzler. I've worked as a math teacher for 6 years, and then worked up at the legislature for a year, and now I'm here. I'm excited to work with you all. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Callista.
All right. So this is just a quick update for those that had not heard after the board meeting. So if you want to go to the next slide. So as you know, the last two data meetings, we had discussed the potential October 1 submission deadline changing for this next school year. And at the data conference, Aaron got a lot of feedback from LEAs, and so there was a proposed compromise that was presented to the board, and that compromise date was 4 working days from the 1st, which is October 5th. And so that was approved by the board. And so for this year, or for this next school year, what that means is that the deadline is still the same, October 7th, because the 5th falls on a weekend. And going forward, the deadline will be the 5th, but again, this year that happens to fall on a weekend. However, what that means, and then before I go to the next part, as always, the historical updates are always for graduation and other purposes need to be in 2 weeks prior to that. So this year that's Monday, September 23rd. So the other important part of this is that there is no extensions, and that is a change that we haven't done before. So Nicole, if you want to go forward. So what this means is that if for some reason your LEA does not meet that deadline, so the 5th or this year, the 7th, because that's on a weekend, or your LEA submits inaccurate data and later you realize it needs to be fixed, that is no longer an option. And so with that compromised later date, it really all SIS issues and data needs to be accurate when you finalize for the last time, because we're not doing extensions or updates. And the consequences of that can affect many different teams, both within your LEA and at USBE. So that will be communicated out in the following months, what that means. So if data does not get in for your LEA for October 1, like how that impacts graduation, funding, and it can affect many different teams, like I said. So USBE is working on sending out a document that every LEA will be asked to sign. That, as far as I understood, it will most likely go to someone in the business administrator group at your LEA. And Aaron will have more information on that. So any questions on that?
I'll just come back and say, we don't know if it needs to be signed or if it's just a notification or what it's going to look like. Again, working with Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones with this. We'll be working with Superintendent Sid Dixon with this as well. We're working with multiple sections to make sure that the communication is just clear. And we've talked about, is it going to be signed? Is it going to be like a part of the assurance document or approach? We don't know. We're working through that process. So just kind of sharing out with the group, but yes, we definitely want to make sure we've communicated clearly to make sure everyone is aware that, oh yeah, extensions, they're just because of that legislative change that we're not going to be able to at all. So again, don't at this point, is it a signed document that we have to read, everyone has to return and track, or is it something else? We're working through that process to get that all figured out. Thank you.
And I don't know if I understood the question in the chat fully, but there are no extensions. So the signing or the agreement is basically just to acknowledge that there are no extensions as part of this new October 1 deadline. Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right, so that's all I have on that item. So we can go ahead and move on to Kristen.
Good morning or afternoon. You can go ahead to the next slide. And I will have bad news too, but we'll get to that in a minute. Cactus will be down June 28th through July 15th. Information about core codes and educator requirements for courses and updates for next year can be found at that website. We have been sending out renewal notices monthly. We're down to less than half, so people are renewing. LEA specific licenses for a new educator who's starting in school year 24-25 cannot be requested until after rollover because you have to put the assignment in. All Cactus updates need to be in by June 28th before noon. So try to get all that done as soon as possible. Next slide. So here's our bad news. Along with the student data being due earlier, so is the teacher data. Educator salary adjustment, which is about $8,000 for most educators. The deadline for an LEA specific request is September 27th to guarantee funding. It must be in there or we will not guarantee that we'll get to it and get it into Cactus. So a reminder is everyone who gets educator salary funding is based on having an active license. So you need to worry about those inactive people who don't have a license and get them in as soon as possible. But we will be pulling the report on first thing October 14th in the morning. So all the updates need to be done by the 13th. This was a surprise to us. We did not know about it until last week. Are there any questions about this? Hi, Steve. We are telling everybody. It's being communicated with the business departments, the HR departments, charter directors, anybody and everybody who is been told about this. So hopefully it will be done. And please tell your people that need to do it. Next slide. Okay, so there was a change to R277-200, which is offering high school credit in grades 6 through 8. SOEP has always been allowed to do this, but now anybody can. You have to be an accredited high school though, or be accredited with grades 9 and higher. The courses cannot count for both middle school requirements and high school requirements. So if a kid takes 9th grade math as an 8th grader, fulfilling his math requirement, he can't count it as a high school course. Be very, very careful about telling students to do this. It can impact scholarships, college acceptance, NCAA. You just be really careful for students who decide to do this. It's lots of universities only accept credits earned in grades 9 through 12. Is there any question about this one? Okay, it's the same. So somebody asked, how does this affect our ability to claim greater than 1 FTE? You should be able to still mark it. Is that changed? But you can generate more than 1 FTE for the student. It's not more membership. So it should just be the same. Okay, you can put the math 1 credits on the 9th grade transcript if they took the class in grade 8. You just need to make it clear that the kid took it in grade 8 or the year, if possible. We just don't want, we don't want a student losing a scholarship. Particular NCAA is very picky, and some universities are too. So you can put it on the transcript, just try to make it clear that it wasn't taken during grade 9, if that makes sense. I don't know about, I thought the early grad flag was picked up, but I might be wrong. Does anybody, Calista, do you know, or Aaron?
So you would, yeah, you can hear me, right? You would need to, wait, reading through the question. I thought early grad flag field was not picked up unless they're in grade. Ooh. Need to look at that.
All right, we'll get back to you on that one.
Don't have the answer.
All right. But it's just, be very, very careful. Okay, SOEP, there's some ambiguity in the rule, and it's not clear if LEAs are required to take students who are only taking SOEP as basically not even existing in their students. So LEAs can require students to take courses in their school or LEA if they want to do SOEP. It's an LEA decision. It's up to you. And if a student just wants to do SOEP, you can ask, if they're not getting any other services and not really participating in the school, they can still utilize the program and get all the same benefits going through homeschool. We've had 2 problems. We had a charter that had a student who made it into their lottery and then decided he didn't want to take any courses at the charter. He just wanted to take SOEP, and that was denying another student a space in the classroom. So that's one reason. And then the other thing is higher ed doesn't like the idea of a student graduating from a high school where they haven't taken any coursework. So because of this, we are waiting for the legislature to come up with some more stronger rules. But right now, it is an LEA decision if you want to enroll a student who is only taking SOEP courses. Is there any questions about that? Oh. So, and Calista just add, the early grad flag is available for grades 6 through 12, but she's going to double check. Okay.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Thanks. So I'm Nicole Sanchez. I'm here in Katie Chalice's place. She is traveling today. So she asked me to talk a little bit about the HB 182, which is the bill that will take effect here pretty soon, and probably has the most impact on data privacy. you could move forward. Thank you. So yeah, perfect, thanks. Okay, so first thing is, as far as kind of what's trending in data privacy right now, if you could go ahead and put up each of the graphics on her slides there. The concept of being able to opt in and opt out is becoming much more interesting and important, especially to parents. So you can see in the olden days, we didn't really collect very much data. More recently, there's been more data collection and more data sharing. And that has led parents to look for more opportunities to have some control over what kind of data is collected and how it's shared. So they're looking for more opportunities to opt in and opt out. And we're anticipating that that's a trend that's going to continue. That parents are going to continue to look for ways that they can opt in and opt out of having their data collected. If you could go forward. So this bill has a lot to do with that desire to control data. There's a link on here. We covered this topic pretty in depth during our spring training. So if you're interested in more information about this and also other bills that passed recently, you can watch that clip there. If you can move forward one. So here's what's new with this new bill. There are a few topics that require consent at registration. So surveys that are used as part of early warning systems, surveys with social emotional learning questions, and then the school climate survey. Each of these three specific surveys require consent, and not just consent in general, like with the protected topics that we've seen in other data privacy bills, but specific consent that is collected at registration. And that means either at the beginning of the school year, or if a student moves in later, then it would be collected at the time that they register whenever they move in. You could move forward one. And then to be clear about early warning systems, HB 84, the school survey bill, requires all LEAs to use an early warning system. However, the surveys associated with an EWS is not a requirement. So if you choose to use the survey from the early warning system, you would need to include that in your registration, in your registration. If you choose not to use the surveys, then that's okay. You have to use an EWS, you don't have to use the surveys. This one is the one that we've been getting a lot of questions about, and unfortunately, I don't know that we have a lot of answers to it. Surveys with social emotional learning questions is not defined in the bill, and we're still trying to understand what that is going to mean. You can see on the screen USBE's definition of what social emotional learning is, but it still leaves some questions about what counts as a survey, what kinds of questions count as social emotional learning questions. So this is something that we're still trying to understand. We're hoping that there will be some guidance as far as what the definition of this term is, or that perhaps local LEAs will be able to define that for themselves, but we're just not quite sure yet about what that's going to look like. And then the last one is the school climate survey. So in the past, LEAs have been required to administer the school climate survey. That is no longer the case. So similar to the early warning system, if you choose to use the school climate survey, then you would need to get consent at registration. You can opt in to using the survey that's created by USBE, and if you choose to do that, USBE will continue to provide support, but it's not a requirement to do the survey at all. And if you would prefer to use a different school climate survey, you can. The important caveat to this is that a lot of school discipline policies still require you to obtain certain kinds of data in order to inform your policy making. So if you choose not to use the USBE school climate survey, you'll want to make sure that the school climate survey you're using still fulfills the need to collect that data so that you can make decisions based off of that data.
Nicole, can I step in for a quick second?
For sure.
And also right now I'm clarifying with some of the legal team, the way House Bill 182 is worded, we are trying to clarify that if LEAs have to make that decision by July 1st, because the way the language makes it sound is if you change your mind and say, oh, well, we initially weren't going to give it, now we do want to give it, I don't think you can possibly give it. So we're just going to work on that language to clarify to see, make sure that, you know, what it means to be in compliance. So just letting y'all know that we're working on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. That's kind of similar to that. We've also had some questions about how this is going to work, considering that the bill goes into effect this summer, but many LEAs have already begun the registration process. And we're not exactly sure what that means either. So that's also something that we're working on. So I appreciate that you brought that up. Thank you. If there's other questions, please let me know or feel free to put them in the chat. So when we're talking about collecting consent, there are some specific requirements about what that's going to look like. Parents have to be able to opt in. The consent is not opt out, it's opt in. And it needs to be paired with a notice that includes these specific elements. So the first is that the survey that you're going to administer has to be included in that notice. And it can't be a summary of the survey. It needs to be the actual survey with the actual questions that will be administered. You also need to include the intended purpose and use for collecting the data and the types of persons or government entities which will receive the data or share the data. And then the final requirement is that you need to include the record series if that's applicable. This is another piece that we're still trying to understand and look into a little bit more. The other bill that's been pretty significant is HB 491. We also have some resources and training as part of our spring training related to this bill. It's a big one, and I'm not going to talk a lot about it here. If you have questions, please feel free to email us, and there's always going to be more training coming out. And as I mentioned, feel free to watch our training video specifically on this. I think the most critical thing to know is just that LEAs will have some things that they'll have to change, mostly related to employee data. But fortunately, there's already so many requirements in place of student data that most of those elements will not need to be changed. And then if you could go one more. Here's some links to some of the resources that I mentioned. So we do have 2 brand new listers that we're really excited about. So you can feel free to join either of those if that's something that interests you. And then the legislative highlights document is really helpful. These other links here are recordings of the trainings that we've already given in regards to those 3 bills, the student survey amendments, the data privacy amendments, and then the third one, sorry, is the school safety amendments. It's just focused on the stuff that's related to data within that bill. So it's not a comprehensive look at that bill. And then always feel free to email us at privacy@schools.utah.gov, and we'd be happy to answer any questions we can for you. So that's what I have. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Right. So update on the level 2 invalid address validations. I want to go into the next screen. As described before, I won't recap what I've done for the last couple of meetings, as I believe that you guys have that down. But if there are any questions that I don't cover with this, please reach out to me and let me know. There is a correction. And that's the primary thing that I'm looking to get communicated today, is that there's a short code, which is shown here with the red arrow indicating to it, which doesn't include the entire code. The entire code, as you can see, is listed right below. If you go out to the Google Plus Codes site to pull a code, there's those 4 characters that come in before the short code. We're requesting that with the Google Plus codes that we get the full Plus code, and that this functionality, both this and the GPS coordinates, are in progress right now and close to being able to be released out. It's expected to be out within the next 2 weeks. And again, our reason for wanting to have the full code is that there's some complexity that for trying to get this out as soon as possible. We're looking to keep that as small and available to get back to as quickly as possible, because I know there's a lot of people chomping at the bit to see the results and see them work and see them accurately. This is primarily focused for rural school districts. If there is a valid address, then we would be continuing to just use the current street address. The current street address is going to be going through processes we've been communicating out for some time, that it's going to become a fatal error, that it has to be able to be a validatable address within the state of Utah. And just as a side note, we've covered this in previous meetings, but there is also the district of residence warnings, which are going to be fatal, and that's going to be applied here very shortly. So if you can make sure that you've addressed all of those correctly, that will be in place for this current finalization period. I believe that we're slated to flip the switch on making those fatal on the 1st. Let me check some of the other comments we've got here. I think I've got the first one, and we're testing this in the Utrecht submissions. Plus codes are not coming back as valid, and that's correct. We currently are hoping to have that out within a week, but I'm trying to, keep a little bit of an open mind if we do find anything, that we're trying to commit to having that done within this sprint, which would be a 2-week period. And we've got a note here that Calista was confirming the invalid district of residence and invalid address. Yes, level 2 fatals next year. Thank you. How is the address confirmed? I think that was on the previous month's slide. We're using currently the Utah GRC, the Graphical Geospatial Resource Center, and they have an API that is answering those for us and letting us know if those are valid addresses. We are looking into finding any potential exclusions. Some of the things which have been mentioned are that there are certain areas where they don't have surveys for recent surveys to cover all of their valid street addresses. So those are potentially going to be a discrepancy where the Utah GRC doesn't have that information. And if you can find those instances, again, please reach out to us and let us know. In between now and the finalization period, we're going to be looking for anything that comes in for results, and like you, trying to get those resolved, and also making sure that taking these extra efforts to be able to get a good validation are sufficient. And if they're not sufficient, then we may look to adding in another API validation system to double up on that, to try to make sure that we are doing our best efforts in that. Has this been communicated to vendors? I'm imagining you're referring to the SIS systems. And we're not reaching out to SISs directly on this, as this is just a data input. The addresses this would just be a change in address line 1, and something that's always been listed and expected for the physical address to be correct. So if there is anything that specifically you would want your SIS to know about, if you think that there's something unexpected or a change they may need to know, feel free to let us know, and also to reach out to them. And we're happy to engage in that conversation with you to determine if there's any risk in the SIS that they're providing. And then I've got is that I think that that we are using Utah GRC, correct? Will address warnings go to fatal this reporting period? This physical address validation is not going fatal for the end of the school year. It's going fatal for the start of the next school year, so the October finalization. And got that answered as well. Sorry, just trying to keep up with all the comments in here. Got a note here from Doug Johnson. We've got a lot of these addresses. Did you work with rural districts when implementing the working with rural districts is what the Google Plus has done in the past already. USB hasn't worked with rural districts on the solution that was already implemented for trying to do this. Google Plus codes, again, are simply a shorthand for GPS. So nobody's really reinventing anything. GPS will work completely sufficient, and you're welcome to do GPS. Again, probably as of next week or the week after, once we have that in place, and those GPSs will be accepted in the address line 1. And we hope that the level 2 fatal errors will not interfere with that many integrations and rostering that depend on level 1 validation. From Suzette, we've got, we don't feel good about changing a legitimate standard street address to some other code simply because it will validate. Parents will not be happy. We are suggesting if the line 1 won't validate, could you validate against line 2? It's an interesting consideration. I'll have to take that back and we can consider if there's something to that. If previously we've suggested that you would put in the valid one in line 1 and then put the other into line 2, that could have things like those rural directions of following this street, so far, then turn, and then it's, 600 yards past there. Those sort of directions are still being suggested for line 2, but that is a viable thought thereof, that we could potentially do a retry between line 1 and line 2 independently. But for now, I can't confirm if that's going to be possible. So we'll try to give further communication on that. We have the same issue, Suzette. We don't like the idea of changing it for our transportation department. Then the buses won't know where to go. So these buses, are these taking directions or are they taking actual addresses? If Logan, if you want to come off mute and give a confirmation on what address you're saying that you're not comfortable with removing that buses are utilizing for an address.
Yeah, I just know that in the past when we've tried to validate addresses, it screws up our transportation department's program that's pulling from our SIS system, pulling these addresses. So if we validate these addresses to a known address, it's making it to where buses are dropping kids off in completely wrong places.
Okay. And what about the similar conversation about if you were to put the specific directions or bus directions into your line 2? As
We would
the
have
address
to
should initially be a physical address that is validatable.
we would have to convince the vendor that we use to write the vendor that we use for our transportation program to pull specific directions. Like, I don't know, if there's a line 2, then make sure you look at line 2 or something like that. I don't know if they would do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I just can't really, you know, I guess wrap my head around just from the level of understanding that I have right now. If you want to send me an email with specifics about some of those instances, we can try to give further feedback on that. But
I can give you
but I can
one
say
quick.
that it is a state requirement that it is validatable. So
I can give you one quick.
we've got to go for it.
Yeah, I can give you one quick scenario that we face here. Excuse me, here. For example, we have like a giant trailer park in one of the areas that's like, I don't know, 7 or 8 streets long, but the address to the trailer park that would validate with Google or validate is right at the front of the trailer park. And so if the buses drop them off there, like the kids are 8 blocks away from home. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that sounds like the purpose for an address line 2 is to get first to address line 1, and then the additional directions are given in number 2. And it's kind of been a long-standing purpose for having 2 separate lines for that. So initially, I would recommend that that's still the direction that we're saying as a state is required, is that we still need to have a fully validatable address for funding and for them to be able to get into the system. For, again, specific directions, that's our purpose for line 2, be it an apartment number or the specifics of working and navigating your way through that specific location. And got rural addresses. They are correct, but will not validate. So in our SIS, we need to show the correct address that will not validate to the parent, bus drivers, etc. Do you also have an example, Doug, of what you're saying, a rural address that is correct but doesn't validate? Is this an instance where, as I was saying, of the survey not matching, or is this a validatable address that, say, the USPS delivers to?
So we live in rural Utah, so any of our addresses that are off a state highway, they show up as they will not validate. So if I take line 1 and I put in the code, which then Utrex would accept as a valid data, then when any of our bus drivers, our parents, anybody looks at the address for their student, they'd have no idea what that code means. So the address is valid. It's just what you're using to authenticate that address won't not validate some of those rural areas, which I don't mind having a code in there. And we've talked in our SIS meeting as far as adding a field for that code, but we have to give the parent what their valid address is that they give us. I mean, that's what we should, as our stakeholders, what we should be showing for them, because that is their address.
So you're saying that this address is a certified address with whom?
So say for instance, it's 500 West Highway 24. That is their certified address. We deal with this a lot, even with shipping and stuff. It's just you'll get the thing, hey, we can't validate that address, which they can't because Google or those places won't, recognize that as a valid address, but that there is no other address. That's it. So you're right, Cliff, is we could use that code and put that in there, which basically gives the coordinates of the address. But for our stakeholders, that makes no sense to them when in their line 1 address, it just shows a code that's not where they live. That reunification drills, we use that address for a ton of things in our district. And if it's just that code, that makes no sense to anybody but Utrex just to validate an address.
Well, it also makes sense to say again, Google Plus codes, or if you give the GPS, then if anyone were to use a device that checks GPS, both of those scenarios, they do work, but I do think that I'm hearing constructive
They would have to
good
convert
feedback
that to the address,
of-
or they would have to be
Yeah.
smart, technology savvy enough to take
Yeah.
that code or that number or code,
Yeah.
then click on it or enter it into something that actually gives them a visual of the actual address.
Yeah. So it does sound like that these instances all apply where we've got 2 sets of an address that needs to be in place. For the address line 1 or 2, I think that the 2 will have to be kept separate. And I can take it back to my team as we are in process of implementing this to take this advice of being able to say, if it fails on address line 1, rerun it with address line 2 as the address. And we can try for having that reverse option for being able to handle this situation.
Cliff, this is Callista. I think someone had put in the chat, a good idea, like not even just having the address line 1 and 2, but a separate field that they can have the validated GPS code, because it sounds like the data is being used for so many other purposes other than to just get into Utrex. The written out address that's not meeting the validation. So they want to keep that.
Yeah, I would say that it would probably be a recommendation on the other direction of that if there's specific school-based information that helps, that isn't an actual state-based address that works, that there probably needs to be an additional field created on the SIS to handle that. For us to implement adding another field or another set of fields, that's a long time duration. That's not something that, your SISs or any of you are going to want to implement super quick to say, now we want to start adding in this new field and a whole bunch of new functionality. And then everybody has to change their functionality that expects that to be a usable address. So the difference between it being a machine address, a machine usable address, to a human usable address, I think that's kind of where the conversation is going on this, is that we've got 2 versions of addresses, human readable, and then we've got machine usable that it can actually ship to it. It's a valid shipping address. It's a valid physical location. It has a GPS. It has a shorthand GPS for a plus code. So at this time, I can't offer adding new fields to the system, especially with the short time frame. So in the current state, we're going to need to follow through with what fields we do have and negotiate the way that it's going to work. So where does the Utah GRC get the addresses from? There's surveyors in each county that are responsible for providing that data. And if they don't provide that data, then it's going to show up invalid and it won't work. So if that county doesn't have a surveyor who's done recent surveys, that's an instance where having a secondary address to be able to send a GPS or a plus code is your means to be able to still satisfy that legislative requirement.
So Cliff,
Okay.
this is
Go ahead.
Joanne that asked that question.
Mhm.
So within our county, we're building faster than they can get the addresses in. And so that's my question. My son-in-law works for the surveyor's office. That's why I know about some of it, but I've been looking at our GIS data and the addresses on the physical houses and comparing them to what we have in our system. And our parents are putting in a different address than what is on their actual documentation for that home. And so is it okay? Do we have the right to, or do we need to contact every parent and change that address? Or do we need to submit something to you guys so that those addresses get up, into your system? How is this whole process going to work is what my question is.
Sure. So as far as with the aspect of getting the address to work, again, that's going to be going through the means of validation that we're doing. So we've got the Utah GRC as our state-driven survey receiving entity with an API to help us do that validation. We are going to be looking again for instances where that isn't sufficient and that the other plus codes aren't able to work and that those are still something that's validatable through another source. And, I'm, willing to take a look at trying to implement something very quickly on our side to try to come up with a secondary source if we find that the Utah GRC is not sufficient. So that is something that, I've already talked to my team about possibilities for. So we are trying to do all efforts possible to handle this from our side as much as we can, as we know that this is a weight on both sides. And this is a burden on both sides. We both have to meet this legislative requirement, and it is taking, significant work and will still take significant work from both sides. I'm not sure if that fully answered your question.
Yes, thank
Do you
you.
want to? Okay.
Yeah, and I'll get back with you on what's happening in our district.
Okay. We've got a long-term, I suggest Utrecht's team starts a process of adding a data field for GPS coordinates or plus code information. Again, this is looked as an alternative to you providing the street address. Long-term, we want a street address. If there's not a street address possible, that's when we're looking to these alternate means of how can you fulfill the requirement for giving us a street address that can be validated.
Yeah, one third of our district is on the Navajo Nation, and I don't think they're going to get street addresses anytime soon.
But they also should be very familiar with receiving mail and using GPS and the plus codes. Those are the current means and methods for receiving things in those locations, is it not?
No, they go to PO boxes.
Or voter registration and other things like that that do require physical addresses and not PO boxes. That's the direction that the legislative is requiring. It's presently not open to PO boxes.
I'll have to look into that.
Hey, I lived on the res. And back then they just gave directions by pointing with their lips. So maybe that'll be valid.
That's valid for address line too. You can write whatever you want in there for those directions. But as a state, we need to make sure that we are able to comply and to be able to get a valid street address. Or alternative that lets us point to a physical point for them. Right. It is a possibility we can try to break out a secondary piece that says this is specifically for GPS or plus codes. I do think that that's going to be an extra cost to everyone involved. SISs don't have it, schools don't have it. This is that would be a completely new thing rather than just putting it in place into the existing slots that we have for the physical address. So we can continue to discuss that, but again, our current state is to go with what's presently available and make things work with that. And next we already have the functionality of addresses in our system. If you're needing additional or different data, then we'd ask you to please consider adding additional fields. So if your addresses work, we don't need you to provide anything additional. If the functionality for getting and collecting valid working addresses is in place, then there isn't anything that you need to do to change it because it will work, it will validate, and there isn't a problem. This is again ensuring that all students, aka their parents, have a physical address that can be reached by the state and validated within the state. And we've got that is by Matt. That is what we discussed in the Aspire users group meeting this morning. Aspire is going to look into adding a separate field for geospatial data. Okay. So yeah, if the more the SIS systems can support it, the sooner we can look at trying to implement it for additional fields and then write a bunch of code to be able to cross-reference multiple places. But that isn't presently within the scope of our time for meeting this October deadline for having everything in place.
This would be different than sending it to a new field in Utrecht. This is just, it would be on Aspire side where if there's a value in that geospatial field, Aspire will send that as the address into Utrecht. Use the Google Plus code or whatever ends up in that field. So
that's a great way to accomplish this for sure. If there's anything that you need from the Utrecht side for that, please reach out, let me know, or have Paula reach out. We're happy to support any SIS with anything that they need to do in addition to make this work. Go ahead, Paul.
Yes, we're going to leave our address one line intact, create another address line for the Google Plus codes or the GPS coordinates, and then we will send whichever data is needed.
Okay. Are you validating on your side to know which one is needed if the one doesn't work? Okay.
Yes.
So you're also building in the API call.
Yeah.
Great. And that's completely available for any SIS to implement. The API that we're using, it's not a pay gate. There's not a limit. It's not going to say you can do the first, 100 or 1,000 or 10,000. It's a public resource.
Yes, there's so many places that the address one touches, like they were saying, transcripts, report cards, looking up a student's address, that we did not want to mess with address one. So that's the direction we're going.
Great. Great. Got a suggestion from Stacy. The human address should be the primary address in our SIS. We deal with humans. What you send to us is what we're concerned with. What you hold in your SIS, that part really doesn't matter to us. It's just that we get the data sent to us as it's outlined through the clearinghouse specification and what's needed for us to be able to advocate for the students and the districts and schools to be able to make sure that funding is able to be provided for everyone. So by all means, that's similar to what Paul had just mentioned, of that as long as you can send us the details that can help you continue to get the funding, that's what we recommend. The means to do that, if you come up with something creative, by all means, take advantage of that. We're sending valid address, still getting failures. We live in rural Utah. We're still implementing the plus codes and the GPS. The valid addresses that you're sending that you're getting failures on, are those street addresses, GPS, or plus codes? What means are you trying to satisfy that as being valid?
Well, they're street addresses and they're valid street addresses. I don't have the manpower to, try to geocode everything. That's gonna be, if your geocode's failing, then if I try to geocode it the same location, then what do we do?
So again, when you're saying that it's a valid address, I still have to ask the question of how are you validating it? That's what we as a state are attempting to do to satisfy this legislative requirement is validation. So we're doing everything we can to validate it.
They receive mail, the bus driver drops them off. All of those things work. But when
Bus driver doesn't
I'm
qualify
getting
as a valid
an
address.
invalid from you, and even some of the Google searches with that address will not validate it as where it's at. It sends it somewhere else. So I don't know how you can say you can trust this as a validation service.
Well, if you can't trust even Google to find the address, then I'm gonna say that I don't know where you're validating it. If you can share any means to better validation, we're open to taking any feedback, looking at possibilities to make this a better service to support everyone, to support the students. But in means and situations where no service is validating it, then it's going to come down to needing a pinpoint like a GPS, whether that's the bus, at the point of the bus drop, you get the GPS point at that state, or, what it is, if it's reaching out to the parents and letting the parents know that this is a state requirement, that this has to be in place for their students. Aaron, I think you just came off mute. Did you want to jump in and give your thoughts on this?
Well, just sharing with the group. So there's obviously enough feedback that we're getting that what we're going to do, Cliff, is we're going to gather a couple SISs that they've put themselves in the chat and saying, okay, we need to have a deeper dive in conversation because legitimate concerns we're saying, I don't have manpower, we can't do certain components. It's like, okay, let's dive into this a little bit deeper because of the timing issue and such. Let's just plan on, we don't need the whole group debating this and just trying to solve this problem in this meeting. We're going to schedule another one within about 2-week period. And let's kind of dive into this a little bit in more detail. So let's leave it as, so we're hearing the comments. We've heard that, we recognize what needs to happen, but at the same time, well, this is where we do compromises and this is where we talk with other individuals where it's like, hey, you have to do it this way. And it's like, all right, let's talk about these outliers or, where it doesn't, the scenarios don't fit. How do we address these scenarios in a manner that's not unreasonable? So for those on the LEAs, I mean, I see your in the chat, a number of them like me. So I say San Juan, I see Emory, I see you went to a severe Tintic. If you guys don't mind, just send me a quick email saying, please include me. And then I'll work with Nicole. We'll set up a time. We'll get Cliff and we'll start. We'll do it outside of this meeting. So, because we still got some training we got to go through for the end of year data submission. So if that's good, if you guys can just send me, for those who just put in the chat, I see it in the chat, and yes, we'll record it from the chat, but please just send me an email. It's Aaron, so aaron.brough@schools.utah.gov. Send that to me. Just say, include me in the discussion on address, and then we'll gather you guys up into the group. I'll work with Cliff and the other individuals. When I say other individuals, we'll be talking, with legislation, with other things that this is going to be needed for. We'll have a discussion. So let's leave it there if that's okay, Cliff.
Certainly. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, I'll go ahead and hand back off. Thank you everyone for the feedback. Know that we are trying our best. So do you want to bring up screen, thanks?
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and transition. The rest of the time, myself, Riley, and Stephanie are gonna be going over a more in-depth view of the year-end UTREX data submission. So go ahead to the next slide, please. And I will let Riley go ahead and start us off.
All right, thanks everyone for sticking through this meeting. We are approaching the year-end submission and finalization period. And so just some reminders about deadlines. The deadline for historical update requests this period is Monday, June 24th by 5 p.m. And if you get in your historical updates, this will guarantee that the updates will be completed before the year-end data submission is finalized. If you're not able to get it in before the deadline, then we'll do our best, but we cannot guarantee anything by the year-end deadline. So the deadline for the year-end data submission this year is Monday, July 8th by 5 p.m. The deadline is on July 7th, except when it falls on a weekend or holiday, and this year the 7th is on a Sunday, and so it's the following Monday, which is the 8th. And as always, we hope for on-time submission by all LEAs. There are not deadline or extensions offered during the year-end submission period. And so we thank you for all your help in making this possible. Next slide, please. Just a few important notes for your end. Please continue to review data, submit daily as the school year finishes. Make sure that you're collecting any necessary data from people at your LEA before they leave school for the summer. Please review and finalize the data and UTREX prior to the year-end submission deadline, and make sure that you have the appropriate personnel in the office or available to press that finalize button. Someone must physically be pressing that button. We cannot do it for you, and the person who does it needs to have the appropriate permission. We also may need to contact you after you finalize if we find something that needs to be fixed in your submission. Sometimes stuff happens, and you might have finalized data that you weren't intending on finalize, like removing all low-income students from your data or whatnot. And so sometimes we just find these issues, and so it's really important that you are available, or if you have someone in your LEA who can respond through July 8th, and even a few days after that date, just in case. So we really appreciate that. I know it's hard with the holiday, but I don't make these date decisions, so I'm so sorry, but we need you here. Next slide, please. Some other notes for year end, you can finalize at any point prior to the deadline once the finalize button is active in UTrex, and this year that goal is for it to be turned on June 17th. We strongly encourage all LEAs to review the courtesy data review that we send out before you finalize your data. We're planning on beginning to do the data reviews next week. There are not a lot of LEAs whose last day of school is going to be in next week. And so there's like a few important fields like membership and certain validations that don't really make sense to review until after the last day of school year. And so we'll probably be completing most of the data reviews the following week. So by May 31st at the latest, we'll prioritize doing the reviews first for LEAs that have the school year earlier. If you would like a review prioritized at the beginning of our window, even if if school isn't out yet, please send us a request by email to our help inbox, data statistics help at schools.utah.gov, and we will prioritize. And you are always welcome to request additional courtesy data reviews up until that submission deadline. Next slide, please. I think we may have lost Nicole. All right, so then just to provide an update on the school summary cumulative report. Right now, this report is not showing any data for LEAs. The UTrex team is working on fixing this report, and we hope and expect that this will be fixed by next week. Once the report is working, please review it and make sure that all the schools in your LEA are showing up. If you're missing any schools, please email us as soon as possible or put in a help desk ticket to the UTrex team.
Riley, and I have just one update on this. So I have been talking with the developer that's working on this report, and she expects that it should be out in production by Monday. That being said, there's a couple fields that we believe the numbers are looking inflated, and that's attendance and incident data, but we wanted to get the report to have data in it for everyone, and so we are still aware of those two other fixes and working on those, but just to give everyone an idea that by Monday that report should not be blank. And so yep, that's the update I have.
Great, thank you so much. Next slide, please. So here's an example of a courtesy data review letter. Many of you have probably seen these if you're not new. And this is, we just send these out. The top part of the letter has review and respond items. And so these are things that we request a response of, either acknowledgement that the things that we have flagged are correct, or that you will update them if they're not correct in a submission before you finalize. And then we also have a section of the courtesy review later that asks you to verify that the data are correct, but we don't necessarily require a response. Next slide, please. So in the courtesy review letter, and we'll go through these all these points more in detail throughout this training. What we look at are and what we ask you to look at as well are fatal errors, warnings that become fatals after the last day of school, warnings in general, and as just a note, we've been talking about these new warnings. Some of them have been warnings or fatals for charters, but they're now applying to all LEAs. The S1.368 is a warning for this finalization period and then will become fatal next school year. And then the invalid district of residence and invalid address warnings will become fatal next school year for all LEAs, but there'll be warnings right now. And then enrollment and membership, demographic counts, reading on grade level statuses, early numeracy statuses. Next slide, please. Reading intervention and early numeracy intervention statuses, kindergarten type codes, incident data, services offered for special ed students with more than 10 cumulative discipline days, SCRAM extended school year counts, early grads, graduation data for special ed students expected to return, and reported credits attempted, credits earned, and course grades. Next slide, please. Fatal errors, these are super duper important that you clear them. Fatal errors block records or parts of records from coming through to UTREX. This can affect funding. Level 1 fatal errors are from the LEA's own data, and for the most part, level 2 fatal errors come from the data once it's in UTREX. It can be errors that are across years or across or between different LEAs. And then fatal errors result when a required field is blank or has an incorrect value. You can still finalize your data with the fatal error, but you may lose funding. Fatal errors also negatively affect the quality of data and the accuracy of student records, and you can always review your fatal errors in the UTREX overview. There are also some warnings that become fatals after the last day of school, and there's a list included at the end of this PowerPoint. There's a new validation that's a warning right now for districts that will go fatal next year. This is the district of residence, and then the district of residence level 2 validation, and invalid address warnings. And then also the dual SCRAM warning and dual SCRAM fatal. It's only a warning until there's been 19 days of overlap, and at 20 days it becomes a fatal error. So this is something that you also want to keep an eye out for, that this won't happen. And then you can review your warnings and fatal errors again in the UTREX overview. Warnings in general, please check all of them. Check SSID warnings and put in SSID merge requests when necessary, and please do them as soon as possible because it requires a lot of manual work. And so if they get put in last minute, it can be really hard to for the team to get them merged. And then there's also warnings that are triggered by things that might be wrong, and you should check. If you verified that the data are correct and they're accurate, you don't have to change anything. You'll just keep getting the warning and you'll have to ignore it. And there's some examples like a grade level inconsistency for a student has skipped a grade level. If that is correct and that data is accurate, then you can ignore that warning. And you can also review the UTREX specifications to see what is what's being flagged or what's being triggered, and compare that your warnings with what is being requested to be submitted in the UTREX specs. Next slide, please. Another thing to check is enrollment and membership. So please check that enrollment validation type codes are reported. There's a validation on this now, so it should be. Check your average daily membership and cumulative enrollment and membership by grade level. Check self-contained membership. Check for students with less than 160 days of memberships, and also check for high counts of students with less than 180 days of membership. We expect that the majority of students should have 180 days of membership. And for most LEAs, we don't expect to see a large percent of students with less than 160 days of membership. Also check that membership doesn't max out at a number below 180 days. We've seen this happen before, and it could be something that there's an issue with how membership is being reported, or some issue with the communication between the SIS and UTREX. And so just ensuring that there's no anomalies that aren't expected. And then also, I mentioned this earlier, but if you need to keep in mind that your SIS and UTREX might not start showing 180 days of membership until after the last day of school is finished. So last year we had done a majority of the data reviews far earlier than the last day of the school year, and we ended up flagging for everyone, and it was causing a little bit of confusion that people had lower than expected membership. And so this is just another reminder that you're probably not going to see students with 180 days of membership until after the last day of the school year. Also check part-time codes that are reported for all students who are enrolled as part-time homeschool, part-time private school, or students who attend your school part-time for some other reason. Check your enrollment and membership by SCRAM, YAC, part-time, and resident status. We look for big unexpected changes compared with the previous year, and we try to catch potential problems with how membership is being submitted. And you can review this data in the school summary cumulative reports and UTREX reports under year-end reports once this gets fixed. And you can download the PDF to review aggregates or see the student data behind the aggregates by downloading the CSV or Excel file. And this PDF will bold any numbers that are different, I can't remember the exact percentage difference, but essentially if it's like a larger than expected difference from the last year data, that number will be bolded. And so that can also help you identify at a quicker glance if there's something that just may look a little bit different. And I do believe the CSV files right now under the school summary cumulative report at year end, it is working. And so it's not as pretty to look at as the PDF, but you're also fully welcome right now to look at the data that you have in CSV form. And here's an example of the school summary cumulative report. This you can see there's like a bold numbers that show some differences from the prior year counts. And I'm going to hand this off to Stephanie.
Thank you, Riley. So for demographic counts, please double check it. This school year, we added 2 new data points, military child and immigrant counts. Please review them as well. So the way we do the courtesy review, and you can check yourself, is basically compare with last year's year-end data that your LEA submitted to see if there are big discrepancies. If so, we anticipate you to double check the data accuracy. You can also review student demographic counts by checking school summary cumulative report in UTREX reports under year-end reports section. About how to locate it, please review April data training slides for reference. Next slide, please. So for students don't have a roll test record, we need a code to explain why they were untested or tested with an alternative assessment. We expect most LEAs would have some students with codes of untested or tested with an alternative assessment, such as AY means student took an alternative test and achieved the goal. AN, student took an alternative test without achieving goal. All parents opt out. S means not in grade 1 to 3 or taking medical leave during the test window. Or U, untested. So it's unlikely that you don't have any of these codes for students in your LEA. If so, you probably need to double check the data accuracy. In addition, Y and N codes are supposed to be the most frequently used code for students who were tested. So Y means students was enrolled in grade 1 to 3 and achieved at or above benchmark. And N means student was enrolled in grade 1 to 3 and achieved below or well below benchmark. Though Rogo status data are required in UTRACs, they are optional in SAS, unfortunately. So most LEAs found it very helpful to enter this through SAS. So after it went to UTRAC system, that would be helpful for you to identify students who don't have a code but need one other than Y or N. Next slide, please. Okay, so please make sure to enter appropriate code of Rogo status for students in grade 1 to 3. Failing to do so or leaving it blank would hurt your participation rate because we're going to assume them untested. But students who were coded with O, S, AY, or AN would not count as untested. Again, you can review Rogo aggregated data in the school summary cumulative report or student level data on rating in grade level with UGG report. Both of them can be downloaded from the UTRACS report, with the former one under year-end report section and the latter one under assessment report section. Next slide, please. Okay, so early numeracy coding rules are similar to Rogo. What you need to do is to make sure you use appropriate code for students who were untested or tested with an alternative numeracy assessment. Our expectation is that most LEAs will have some students with code other than Y and N. It is unlikely that you don't have any of these codes for students in your LEA. If so, you probably need to double check the data accuracy. Some Rogo data entering tip, the same Rogo data entering tip applies to early numeracy too. So LEAs can enter all students' early numeracy results into your SIS and double check cells left blank after data is submitted to UTRACS. Next slide, please. Please keep in mind that if there are students with no test and no code to explain why, we would have to assume the student was untested. Again, you can review aggregated early numeracy data in school summary cumulative report and student level data in examine data file. So the latter one needs to be downloaded from UTRACS overview dashboard. Next slide, please. The rating intervention statuses are required for students enrolled in grade 1 to 3 with at least 20 days of membership. If it's blank and the student has equal or more than 20 days of membership, a fatal error is triggered. Again, you can review this aggregated data in the school summary cumulative report or view the student data by downloading the rating on grade level with UGG report. Next slide, please. The early numeracy statuses are required for students enrolled in grade 1 to 3 with at least 20 days of membership. If it's blank and the student has greater than 19 days of membership, or a fatal error will be triggered as well.
not in first year of reporting. Okay. All right, next slide, please. Okay, the kindergarten type code. This year, the kindergarten type code updated to include only two codes. One is full day and the other one is half day. So starting in school year 2023, kindergarten type codes are used for WPU calculations. Students with a regular half day kindergarten will still receive 55% of their ADM, while students with full day kindergarten will be funded at 100% of the ADM. So the accuracy of this data is extremely important for funding. Last October, a lot of LEAs reported this counts incorrectly, and we had to send out a Qualtrics survey. So please make sure your kindergarten type codes are finalized correctly in UTRACs by the year-end deadline. Next slide, please. We will review this data by checking your current kindergarten type counts in UTRACs and the Qualtrics count with your LEA sent in October. We don't expect big discrepancies between those two. The goal is to make sure that we don't use NN when it's supposed to be FN. Because your SAS might use NN, which is half day, as the default kindergarten type code. In this case, you need to be updated if the student receive full day kindergarten. Failing to do so may hurt your funding. You can also review this data in the school summary cumulative report and in the examine data file for student level data. Next slide, please. Incident data. So all disciplinary removal from students' regular instruction must be reported, as well as incidents involving school resource officer or law enforcement officer activities, and all incidents in which the student was an offender or victim of bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, or retaliation. SRO and LEO related fields, as well as the retaliation fields, are required as of school year 2023. So we don't expect LEAs to report zero incidents, especially for the large LEAs. We are looking for LEAs that report zero or very few incidents reported relative to their total enrollment. The threshold we use in our data review is the data ratio about 1 incident per every 50 students. So if your LEA reported more than 1 incident per every 50 students, it's reasonable in most cases. Otherwise, you probably need to double check it for data accuracy purpose. Next slide, please. The purpose of appropriately reporting your incident data is to improve data quality and avoid potential consequences. So if no incident data is reported for special ed for 3 consecutive years, then LEA will receive a risk score 5 for indicator 4 in their RDA. You can review the incident data in the discipline incident summary report in the UTRACs reports under year-round reports. Next slide, please. So there's a trick you probably want to double check when you're reporting incident data to the state. So in Compass, users need to check the report to state box in order to successfully submit it to state. So in the past, we found that some LEAs failed to do so. It caused the not successfully submitted their incident data to state. Also check if your SIS has a send to state box, even though you don't use the Compass. or a final step to send incident data to UTracks? If so, please make sure to check that box. Okay, next slide, please. Here are some laws or board rules for what kind of incident data you need to report to the state. I'm not going to reading through all of them, but there are really good resources for you to look at offline if you have questions about what kind of incident data we require LEAs to report to a state. Next slide, please. This is also some law or board rules for your reference. Next slide, please. Okay, so Kalista, you can take it away.
Okay, thank you. So continuing on, these are more items that we will be reviewing during the courtesy data review and that you should be reviewing in preparation to finalize in July. So for the services offered, this is a special ed field, and you'll just want to check that that flag has been reported correctly. For any special ed students who have had more than 10 days of 10 cumulative days of disciplines. You can check that in the discipline incident summary. There's a specific report for special education students, and that's found in the UTREX reports under year-round reports. You can also reach out to us if you have questions about that, and we flag it on your review. We can help you to identify which students are needing to be checked. Next slide, please. This is another special education data point that needs to be reviewed at year end. So we need you to check that your extended school year counts are being reported accurately. What we will look for, similar to other counts, is big or unexpected changes compared to last year, the previous years. Or if you're reporting 0, we will still mark that just for you to check and make sure that that's correct. The reason that we want you to check it, even if it's 0 and you reported 0 last year, is because funding is based on the year-end data for extended school year counts. So we want to make sure that you get appropriate funding if you did have a count and are not reporting it. There is a specific report for these counts, and it's under the year-end UTREX reports, and it's the SCRAM Extended School Year Report. All right, next slide. Moving into graduation data. So for year-end, there are a few specific things that we'll review. We want you to review all of your graduation codes in general, but early graduates in particular, these are tied to funding, and so it's important that those counts are correct at year end. A newer code, it's been in place the last few years, is the CB exit code. That is a code for competency-based education, and so not all LEAs are eligible to use that exit code. But if your LEA has schools that are competency-based and the flag is marked in cactus, then we would expect that you would at least have some of those codes reported. And if not, maybe you want to review that, or we want to understand why that code's not being used. So again, that would only apply to schools that actually have that competency-based flag in cactus. For other early graduates, both a high school completion status code and an early exit code must be submitted to generate funding. And I often get questions about this. And so high school completion status and exit code are two separate fields with two separate code lists in the UTREC specifications. So I just want to make that point. What we will be checking in particular on this one is whether there are enough 11 exit codes. So 11 is the actual code. You do not have to be in 11th grade. That code is for any early graduate in 9th, 10th, or 11th grade. We check that the count of those 11 exit codes matches the number of early grads in grades 9, 10, and 11. And so we will mark that on your review if it's not matching up or we think that it might not be reported correctly, because again, that early exit code will generate funding. Entering this data, well, I just said that it affects funding and also the student's ability to earn scholarships. You can review this as always in the school summary cumulative or in your examine file. Next slide. Some other key graduation data points to pay attention to prior to July are the following codes. We don't expect to see a ton of withdrawn exit codes reported. I think it's gotten a lot better now, but we still keep this on here as part of the training because in the past, that WD or withdraw exit code was overused, and perhaps because there was misunderstanding about what that meant. But there are pretty specific guidelines on when to use the withdraw exit code, and it's not one that is used often. There's certain circumstances that code would apply to. So we just want you to check that, and we will check it as well if it's being used if there's a lot of students being coded that way. We just want to look and make sure that there's not a better, more accurate code that could be used instead of withdraw. Also, withdraw will be a dropout if it's part of your cohort graduation data. The GP or graduation pending completion status code, we will look at the count that you're submitting when we do your data review and UTRECs. The reason we look at that is because graduation pending is one of those statuses that will turn to a dropout come October if it's not updated. So we just want to make sure that you are using that code correctly. It's not meant to be used like as a placeholder code if you just don't know what a student is doing. It's supposed to be used for students that intend to finish up graduation over the summer and before October 1st. So if a student meets that requirement, then you should code them as graduation pending. Otherwise, they should be coded in a different way that's more accurate. Similar to the graduation pending, exiting to adult ed or to take the GED should also be used for students that have actually exited to either go to adult ed, so they're leaving K-12 public education, or to go take the GED. All three of those codes will count as dropouts, not in July, but if they're not updated by October. So I just want to make that clear because they may end up graduating or they may end up getting their GED, but you do have to actually go back and update those. And we'll talk about that after July. But that's why we want to make sure that in July, only students that are exiting in these ways are getting coded that way. And then finally, if a student is coded with a permanent exit status, which implies to UTREX that they are not returning. So some examples of that is a graduate with advanced math, or with Carnegie units, which is through adult ed, or if they passed away, or if they aged out. All of those codes imply to UTREX the student is done. And so if that code is used in July, and then the student is re-enrolled in the fall, it will cause a fatal error. And so there are circumstances where a student might change their plan, or sometimes coding gets just done, inaccurately on accident for a few students, and that's fine. But for the majority of students, we just want you to pay attention to the use of the codes, especially GR, GQ, GM, because if your SIS is defaulting everyone to be a graduate, come July, then in October, you're going to have a lot of historical updates. And that's a lot of work for you and for us in the event that those students didn't actually graduate and they re-enroll. So please just try to get it right as best you can in July. Next slide. This is a new exit code. We've been announcing it for a while. It should now be in place in UTREX for you to submit. It's similar to the CB exit code, but it's not for early graduates necessarily. So it's the IB exit code, which is for international baccalaureate schools. So again, this is only a subset of LEAs that would be able to even use this code. But if you are an LEA that has schools with that flag and cactus to offer international baccalaureate, then this is a code you would want to start using for students that exit and graduate. And I believe it is tied to funding. And so this is the very first year we're accepting it. And so we do expect that there may be some kinks with submitting it, and we want to figure all of that out in this submission. So please reach out if you are trying to submit it and it's not working, or we want to make sure that that is reported and that everything's working on the UTREX side to accept it. All right, next slide. And then these next couple slides are in regards to graduation data and notes for special education students. So there's a link in there for guidelines specifically for students with disabilities, and it includes information about IDEA requirements and FAPE, participation in graduation ceremonies, hypothetical situations, when more than one completion status may be appropriate for that student, and then recommendations on which code to use based on how it is treated in the OSEP indicator 1 and 2 grad and dropout rates, as well as the 4-year cohort rate. And then we provided a link for more information on the OSEP indicators. If you have specific questions about students with disabilities and how to code them, you can reach out to Malia. Lavinia also can help with students that are graduating or post-high students. And then I can help answer to a certain extent with coding, completion statuses, and exit codes. Next slide. Some common scenarios that we see with special ed coding. So for example, the CT versus RT code, when to use those. So in the cohort graduation rate, CT is an other completer, which is neither a graduate nor a dropout. And RT is a continuing student. which is neither a graduate or a dropout. So neither code really provides any advantage over the other in the cohort rates. We do want to make sure that you use the right code though for data accuracy. And then for indicators 1 and 2, graduation and dropout exit rate. CT, the students will be included in your denominator, but will not be included in the numerator. For RT, they will be excluded from your indicator 1 and 2 rates. So there is a difference for that. And then the RT code does provide an advantage in these 2 rates. Next slide. On the courtesy data review, we will review your RA and GA data, this is a very specific group of students. This is for students who have the is 1% flag and are working to get their alternate diploma, or GA students that do get their alternate diploma and graduate. So we will give you the counts of each of these that are being reported in UTREX, and then we will ask some LEAs to review certain students if they meet some of the following criteria. So we're looking for students that were reported with the RA code last year in 2023, who have returned to school but have not had RA or GA code reported this year. Because essentially, if they were reported as RA last year, we adjusted their cohort to 2024. And so this year, now they're going to count in your grad rate. So if a student is still working toward the alternate diploma and they're expected to return again next year in 2025, they need to have the RA code reported again in 2024. So again, that's really important because they will count as a dropout if you don't code them correctly. And then if a student has completed the alternate diploma, they need to have the completion status coded with the GA code in order to count as a graduate. Once a student has had their cohort reassigned, all other graduate codes are treated as other completers. So that's really important for this particular group of students. The GA code does matter and needs to be reported correctly for them to count as a graduate. Okay, next slide. And then I kind of already said this, but for those RA students that were coded last year who either just didn't return to school this year, or they're not being reported in UTREX for whatever reason, they will count as a dropout in their reassigned cohort year. And so you do just want to check if any of those codes can be updated, if they are in UTREX this year, so you can avoid having them count as a dropout if that's possible. All right, next slide. And then lastly, for these special ed graduation slides for exit codes, this is just a clarification on when to use the A exit code versus X exit code. So X is for students who are exiting the school and not expected to return. So this may include students that are transferring or who dropped out or who graduated. Do not use the X code at the end of the year if the student is expected to return to the same school after summer. You would want to use the P code for those students. A is for students who exit special ed but will continue in enrollment in regular placement. You do not want to use the A code at the end of the year if the student is not expected to return after summer in that case, you would want to use the exit code. All right, next slide. And then I have talked about this before, but this is just a note about SOEP and graduation data because we get a lot of questions about this. For the cohort graduation rate, we only take enrollments that are marked as school of record, not no. And so SOEP enrollments often are reported as school of record no, that's a requirement. And so when a student does transfer out and goes to a different school and they're doing SOEP, they will still be counted to your LEA. Even if you use the transfer code and they did enroll somewhere else, if that next enrollment is school of record no, they're still going to be counted to you for the cohort graduation rate. And so you just, again, sometimes there's nothing you can do about that if everything has been coded correctly, but sometimes it's worth reviewing those student enrollments because if they exit in such a way that can be updated to exclude them from your grad rate, then that can be helpful in some cases and make the data more accurate. So you can always follow up with that next LEA on how they're being enrolled and what they're doing at that next school. Especially if they are doing adult ed or a GED or something like that, you can follow up on the UZI report and reflect that on your record that they completed the GED or whatever the case may be. If the student is an SOEP with no accompanying enrollment with a primary LEA, the student may be participating in SOEP as a homeschool or private school student. And so that's worth following up on as well, because you could then exit them as transfer to private or transfer to homeschool. And that would exclude them from your grad rate. All right, next slide.
Melissa, you have a question in the
Oh,
chat.
sorry about that. So first, I think that means for students who was coded with the RA code and then received a certificate of completion, would that be the certificate of completion status code? If they did not receive their alternate diploma, then yes, their final status should reflect how they actually finished. And so if that was with a certificate of completion in that adjusted cohort year, then yes, you would code them with that CT code. All right. Any other questions related to graduation at year end? Okay, so the last thing that we will review on the courtesy review is related to the course credits attempted, earned, and course grades. The reason that we review this is because it's used in accountability. Just for those sometimes that ask, this is only for schools that have students in grades 9 through 12. So if your LEA does not have students in grades 9 through 12, then this would not show up on your data review or on your school summary cumulative report, because it's only reporting for those students that are in grades 9 through 12. And again, what we'll look at is credits earned as a percentage of credits attempted. And we expect to generally see high percentages, but sometimes there are explainable reasons why they may not be high. But one reason that it might be a lower percent is because the LEA hasn't entered the credits earned yet. And so in that case, we would want you to review and fix it. And so that's why we review it and point it out. It's not necessarily always that your data is wrong, but in the event that you haven't entered certain data yet, we want to flag that so that you can get that entered. Also, if you don't enter the data, you could lose accountability points. So that's important. And there is a table on the end of this school summary cumulative report that gives you those percentages. And we will also mark it on your courtesy data review. Next slide. So the next few slides are just resources of things that are important and where you can reference them, and as well as contact information about where to get help during the next few months. So this slide was referenced at the beginning when we were talking about fatal errors and warnings. So these are the validations that start triggering at year end or on the last day of school. And so they're just important to pay attention to because you may not have them now. And if we do your review before your last day of school, these may not be showing up. And then all of a sudden, a month from now, you might start having these validations. So it's just important to keep in mind the point in time of when you're reviewing your data or when we're reviewing your data, because things can change daily. And then there's a link to the current UTREC specifications, which has great information about each of the validations and what they mean. You can also reach out to us if you need help on that. Next slide. So where to find important year-end data? We've kind of been saying it along the way, but here it is all in just one slide. So for UTREX reports, you do need to have access to Data Gateway and have the right role to be able to view those. For those that are submitting the data, assuming that you have the right role, the year-end reports under UTREX reports are very important. Those are the ones that need to be downloaded when you finalize. And so all of those reports are great in the review process as well as once you're done finalizing. As was stated earlier, the school summary cumulative has been, the PDF has not had data in it for anybody, and it's being worked on. And like I heard during this meeting from the UTREX team that it should be fixed by Monday to show data. There are still a couple issues with like attendance and incident counts, but the enrollment counts, all the demographic counts, that stuff should be good, as well as it should have all of the schools that are new. So please check that. Next week it should be there for all LEAs. The consolidated membership report doesn't get talked about a lot, but it is really useful for digging into membership issues, especially at the student level. So I would recommend looking at that if you're reviewing membership data. And then the SCRAM extended school year report, that is important to review as well. Year-round reports that are important for this time of year are the discipline ones. There's a discipline incident summary report and then a discipline incident summary for special education students. So those are both really important to review before July. And then the graduation for 4 years report, I put that on there as a reference for you. The cohort data won't be final until October, but it's still important to review your data now just so you'll have less work come October. And then the assessment reports for that reading on grade level data at the student level, there is a report for that. We have a link to the year-end guidelines for UTREX with the deadline and all of the important data points that need to be reviewed, and then a link to the UTREX specifications. And then, as always, the overview on the data gateway is a critical place to review your errors, warnings. That's where the examine data file is. I would recommend downloading that when you finalize as well. And then it also shows the status of your collections and submissions, which becomes really important at this time of year. All right, next slide.
Hey, Calissa, there's a question in the chat.
Here's the link for the PDF with the graduation and dropout codes. Okay, yes. I don't know if the version we have is different from what you have, but well, Riley may have to check. Our website changed recently, so it used to be on our team's website under the reports and then graduation tab. So maybe Riley, if you could check on the current website if that is still there. And it was at the very bottom. It's called the federal codes. If not,
Yeah, we do. I'll put
okay.
it in the chat.
Okay, so she will put the link in the chat for you. Okay, we've talked about this in the past. We really recommend, especially when we get a lot of people reaching out at the end of the year about specific students, we recommend using the CSV files as well as the PDFs, because the CSVs can actually allow you to filter on student level data and dig into problems, which is what we would do if you reach out to us. And so, as well as the student lookup function on Data Gateway, those are great resources to figure out problems. And we just want to reiterate that we will do a courtesy data review, but it is a courtesy, and sometimes we may not catch every single problem in your data. And so LEAs also need to be reviewing their own data because you know your schools and students better than we do, and may be able to catch things that we may have missed. So please do rely on the courtesy data review, but also do your own review. All right, next slide. And then this is just talking about how to use the CSV to filter on student level data, which we can also help you do if you have questions on that. Next slide. This gives you some of those filters that would be key to getting the counts that show up in your PDF. So students are not going to show up if they have fatal errors. The counts include grades K through 12, school of record, no enrollments are excluded, and then they need to have a Utah resident status code and have membership greater than 0. So those filters will generally give you students that are included in counts and for funding. Okay, next slide. If you need help, I think most of you know where to go, but please utilize these resources as needed. The app help desk is where you can put in a ticket, and those tickets can be routed to either our team or Cliff's team, or if you're doing an SSID merge, things like that, you can use the ticketing system. You can also get help from your individual SIS, so please utilize that if it's not on the UTREX side. And then if you have questions about specific data points or about your courtesy data review, you can reach out to our team. We have a general help email, and then we also have our individual team members that you can reach out to. All right, next slide. And then this is just a last FYI. So I will be out during the finalization window. It's still a little up in the air. I will for sure be out by July 1st and will not be back until September. So I will for sure be back for the October submission, and I will be here during the courtesy data reviews. But sometime in June, I possibly may go out, and that's due to maternity leave. So just sharing that because I know a lot of people reach out to me personally with questions and calls. So just wanted to make that announcement. If for some reason in June I stop responding to you. But we do have other members of our team as well as I just shared the ticketing system that will go to the Utrex team if you are needing assistance during that time. And I believe that's all we have, so we can open it up for any questions. And just as a reminder, there will be an LEA data meeting in June. So we will still meet one more time before the deadline in July. And we will email out all of these slides from today, as well as the recording link and notes. And then please don't forget to email Erin if you're one of the LEAs that would like to provide feedback about the invalid address validations. The question about the statewide SIS, so it passed to a certain extent. It still has to go to the legislators. So it's not something that's going to be happening like next year. The board passed the first step and it still has to go through other approvals, and we would be at least a few years out from that. So all right, well, thank you everyone for joining, and please reach out. Oh, one more question. Dual enrollment with the parents homeschooling. So when you say dual enrollment, is there 2 enrollments in Utrex?
So the question I had from my BA brought up was in one of her meetings is how to do dual enrollment with those that are going to take advantage of vouchers, and how we do that in our SIS, or how we report that enrollment to Utrex if they want to partially enroll in a school district.
Okay, I am not familiar with this voucher. Does anyone else on this call from USBE have an answer for this? Doug, that might be something that I have to follow up on with you specifically to get, I don't want to just say something that's not right, so.
Okay, yeah, Rebecca, you're right. It's in relation with the Utah Education Fifth
Oh,
Bill.
okay. Okay. Yeah,
I can speak to that.
Okay.
So the Utah Fit for All Scholarship Program, initially when it was released, it talked about allowing for partial, but there's been an amendment to the rules for that. So it doesn't actually allow partial enrollment in public education. So if they show up in Utrex, then it's going to make them not able to receive funding for the Utah Fits for All, or be booted out of the Utah Fits for All.
Okay, so
And the
there should
same
not
with
be a
Carson
dual
Smith and SOEP. Yeah, it doesn't allow them to be in two of any of those programs, Carson Smith, SOEP, or Utah Fits for All. I think maybe there might be some cross stuff with outside things out other than that, but within those four, it's just a one position only. Either Utah, Utrex, SOEP, Carson Smith, or Utah Fit for All.
Thank you.
All right, well, if there's no other questions, then I think we can end. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.